You've put a pretty face on the darkest times in my life. As you can imagine, you're a mother. I had my son in my late 30s, and the marriage did not last more than 5 years. Writing Wonder and Beauty, I didn't know where my son was, if he was dead or alive. He didn't know where I was, if I was dead or alive, but I was going to certainly leave something of legacy for him no matter what. And that's what this work became. I guess once again, I refer back to God. I'm not a reluctant follower. I'm not, but I'm just me.
Welcome to Big Bold Moves Abundant Life. I'm your host, Lisa Marie Heinz, and today's conversation is one that touched my heart deeply. I'm sitting down with beautiful and inspiring Charla Miller. She's the author of Wonder and Beauty. We'll talk about resilience, faith, healing, beauty, and what it truly means to walk through unimaginable challenges while still choosing hope. This is more than a conversation about loss or transformation. It's about discovering purpose in pain, learning to trust the process even when life feels uncertain, and remembering that beauty can still rise from the ashes. I know this episode is going to stay with you for a long time. Clarity shines, wealth on the horizon. It's fine. Hi, Charla.
Lisa, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'd love to just begin here because recently I read your book, Wonder and Beauty, and it was so thoughtfully written. When you look back at your journey, Charla, tell me what part of your story felt most important for you to share in that book.
Well, it's woven all the way through the story, which is truly to walk by faith and not by sight. And that's incredibly difficult, especially with that type of story or in a situation like that. But that keeps coming up for me over and over again right now, is still continuing to walk by faith and not by sight. And that is a challenge for any human. Yeah.
Absolutely. No question. With this podcast that I do, it's been really a lot of fun for me because I get to dive into people's lives and their stories. My question is always, how do you define abundance? Because we call it Big Bold Moves Abundant Life. And everybody has a very different response to the word abundance. And my goal is always to get into people's mind a little bit and find out what that means to them.
Abundance for me has to include peace of mind, peace of being, peace in life, because I've had money and I've not had money. I've had beautiful homes and not had beautiful homes, cars, and so on and so forth. I've traveled the world. So I think for me, abundance is peaceful. And the older that I get, the more I understand I really don't create well in chaos. Chaos for me is very unabundant. It's also abundance for me is staying present, being here, right here in the moment, and knowing what a gift this is, because we just met on the fly a week or so ago, right? And I thought I really need to sign up on your podcast and see if you find anything about what I've walked through and created interesting enough for your audience. This is abundant to me. And I think abundance is a mindset, because you certainly can't create any level of abundance from a poverty mindset. And that, for me, starts with my attitude or my point of view towards something.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. We just like you said, we only met just a little bit ago. And as I dive into every guest that I have on here as a gift, I feel like it's a gift to me that you can share your story. Oh my goodness. There's so much in our life that we can get lost on, but it always comes back to many of the points that you just made about having the ability to see beyond that. And before we get into all that you've built, because certainly you are a remarkable, beautiful woman, take me back to the beginning a little bit. When did you first realize that you had this gift of beauty and transformation? Because clearly your career is all about beauty, but in the transformation that comes from that, and what that drew you to come into the world in a way that you presented yourself in that beautiful way?
Quickly, when I was growing up, as a little girl, I had an aunt that was a painter and she painted with oils. Now, if you've ever painted with acrylic or oils or watercolor or done anything like that on a canvas, to me, I thought it was just magic. And I loved this aunt. And then I had a cousin that was a graphic artist. So I grew up watching them and always drawing and things like that. In my high school years, I met a man named Mr. Ray. I lived right outside of Los Angeles. Not in Los Angeles, but outside of Los Angeles. And he came to speak to our vocations class. What do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I'm a hairdresser now. I knew what hairdressers were, and I'm a makeup artist. And I went, what's that? That was the beginning. What's that? You mean you make people? Because I'd seen my aunts and my cousins, they're older. I didn't have any older sisters. I was the eldest daughter. And I thought, people get paid to do that. And the light bulb went on. This was in the 10th grade, right? So from there, once I graduated, I knocked on every door. I'm that kind of person. I'm that kind of woman. And Hollywood wasn't too far away. And this was before the internet, before cell phones. Can you imagine? Before any of our life today existed, how we communicate so quickly and freely. And I just called up studios and knocked on doors. Hi, my name is Charla Miller and I'm a makeup artist. Well, one thing led to another, as it always does. I was trained at a very young age by some of the masters in Hollywood in the film business. The Westmores, Michael Westmore, Barry Coper, Tommy Cole. He used to be one of the Musketeers. And I mean, that may be too old for some of your audience, but remember in the 50s, 60s, 70s, right? And then I went back to school and I got my aesthetic license because I wanted to know, as I'm putting on makeup on an actor or a woman, like how's the skin react? And I love to learn. So I went in that direction. I also took some hairdressing classes because I did some hairdressing when I was in Hollywood.
You've had such a great, rich career in Hollywood, and you are now working much closer with women who are over 50 as part of your focus. And when did that concept first enter your world? Here you are in a new place. And I like to see the thread that brings you from the years ago when you said you had your inspiration from your aunt really inspire you to where you are today. And then you kept meeting the people that you needed to meet to line you up.
Yes, there's one specific story that I love to share with the clients that I work with because if it's not tough enough as a 20-year-old or a 30 or a 40-year-old, right? Especially after you start having your children, if that's what you choose to do and you have a family. I hear this all the time with my clients 50 and up. I did a wedding, and I think that's when I started to really transition out of the advertising end of the industry, the fashion industry, the television industry, the celebrity industry when I was in California. And I started doing weddings. So I was on some very big crews that did huge weddings everywhere in Napa Valley to Morro Bay, all the most beautiful places in Northern California and beyond. They used to give me, there would be like 4 or 5 of the artists, and they'd always give me because, and I take this as a compliment, the difficult ones, the ones that are, not like the one and done, the just paint their faces and they're just naturally beautiful. So one day I got the matriarch of the family. Her name was Lillian. She was a centenarian. She was actually 100 years old. And none of the girls, I'm not saying none of the girls wanted to do her, but I mean, she'd not gone through all that facelift and all of that. She literally was a natural woman at the age of 100. And that was such a gift for me because she was engaged, she was clear, she was excited. They doted over Lillian. I had Lillian in my chair and I got to say, well, do you want to do like a Chanel red lip or do you want to do something a little sexier? She's like, what are you saying? And I said, I really love this fuchsia. I think this fuchsia would be just striking on you. And it was so much fun because that's when I really got to understand that beauty, at least in the way Lillian looked at it, as many ways the way I look at it, isn't necessarily about the injectables. Nothing wrong with that if that's where you want to go and do whatever you want. But I loved her. And I said, Lillian, can you please share with me your beauty secret? And this was her beauty secret. She said, every day I just got up and put my face on. Now, that's what your grandma would say, right? Or maybe your mom would say, depending on what generation you're from. But when Lillian said that, it told me so much more about her. You put your best foot forward. You do the best you can with what you have. She'd lived 100 years and she was loved and doted over. And it was probably one of my favorite makeup jobs I ever did. So that was really a great transition from my celebrity life as a Hollywood makeup artist, or even a Silicon Valley makeup artist, or any of those, or the NFL, or all the people that I came in contact with, to women, regular women. And I'm a believer, and that's where God wanted me next, because that's where I could best serve. But I also got rewarded so much more richly, maybe not in monetary value, but certainly in a soulful way. It was very abundant because that's what started making me become the makeup artist that I still am today. Because I'm telling you, if you sit down and I get you in my chair, that's my tagline. If I get you in my chair, it's not about selling you X amount of money. It's about when you leave me and I do my magic with you, that I actually have really changed your brain about how you think about you and your beauty and your age. That's my whole goal. I think it's my game. I think I'm amazing at it because I've been doing it for so long. But I think that's the biggest gift I can give to women, because women are intrinsically so hard on themselves.
That's beautiful. I want to say that when I saw you in the room and in the group that we were in, I was like, oh my gosh, you are stunning. You're so beautiful. And we all have a story, and I love hearing that story. And you don't know me at all. We just met, like we said, but I was in the cosmetic industry for about, I'm still in it now, but for about 15 years, I was a top
Okay.
leader in an industry where same message. It's not about anything but how you feel. And when you feel good, you do really, really well. And what a beautiful example to see a woman who's just lived her life with that understanding. And when somebody asked her, like you did, she was able to voice what that was like for herself. And I can recall in my experience, there was a young girl that walked into my chair and she sat down and she didn't even make eye contact. Her eyes were low. Her body was kind of slumped in the chair. By the time we were finished with our time together, she sat up tall and she grabbed the mirror and she looked and she said, oh my gosh, if I look like this all the time, I could conquer the world. And this was a long time ago. And those moments, they stick with us. And the one thing that I love to say is, we were never meant to see what we looked like. We were never meant to have a reflection or a phone in our hands where we can do selfies. The
I agree.
only, back in the day, reflection that you would have seen, I'm a believing girl myself, was a reflection in a body of water or in something that was distorted. You would never actually see. So we're supposed to project looking out as opposed to looking at ourselves. So, oh my
I
gosh, we
love
have
that.
so much in common when it comes to just that industry and how, again, it makes us feel and not, we're not doing it for anybody else. We should be doing it for ourselves. But
Mhm.
take me on a journey through how you were in California and here you are in Florida, which is where we met. How did you get here? And now that you're here, what is your focus?
In 2021, the lockdowns in California, I had been living over in Ascot, England for 2 months, or visiting a girlfriend. And then the world shut down. And I got back to California in March 26th of 2021, I believe. And the lockdowns were really, really crazy. And I was living with family at the time. I was going to go back and get my corporate job and all of that. Hi, get a corporate job, get your mortgage, do all that. And that's not what happened. I knew that I could not live the way they were asking people to live. And I know the Floridians had a very different experience than California or New York or some of these other states. And so my son was in Orlando at the time, interning at the University of Orlando. And so I had finished up some work in California and I was pretty concerned about how I was going to navigate life in California. So I came out to visit him. And at the same time, after I visited him, it was New Year's Day, 20, was it 2022, 2021? I can't even keep track anymore, but I rented a car. I did a 2 week drive through Florida from coast to coast. I'd been in Clearwater, I'd been in Orlando a long time ago. I'd seen my son overnight, and then I had different girlfriends, one in Jupiter, one in Daytona, one in Siesta Key, a friend of a friend. And then I had visited Clearwater years before that. And I thought, I'm going to hit those four spots and see what I think about Florida. I took 2 weeks to do this. I get over to the Siesta Key area and I literally had to get back to Orlando. I had no real understanding of like where I was and how far things were. And obviously, I've got a navigation and all that, but I had no idea how far I had driven. And I remember the woman I was staying with said, "You have to see Siesta Key. You just have to see it." And I thought, I don't have much time because I've got to catch a flight back to LA and I got to go to Orlando. But we went and we drove down to Siesta Key and I saw that powder white sand and I saw people without masks and smiling. And I thought, what is this place? It was so shockingly polar opposite of where I had come from, which was my home all my life. California was always my home. I've traveled a lot, but I always went back to California. So it was as if I had stepped on the moon in a way. And it just, I looked like an alien because I was like, what is going, like people can do this here. So I think that's when I made my decision. I got in my car, drove to Orlando, hopped on a plane, did LA, drove to San Diego that same day. And that same night, and the next day, I went back to my storage and started selling everything out of it. 5 weeks later, I was back here. I drove across the country by myself to see for myself what had happened to my country. And here I am, and I've been here 5 years now.
I love it. And I can only imagine what that's like to just make that decision. We talk about big, bold moves. Boy, you are the poster child for big, bold moves to see what you've done. So as you're coming across and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to paradise where people are free to breathe. What were some of the
Yes.
thoughts that you were thinking when you were making that trip as far as, okay, where am I going to stay? What am I going to do? And, I feel like God directs our path. He's not
Yes,
going
I
to
do
put us
too.
in a place where He's going to leave us if He's taken us down that journey and He's spoken clearly with our next direction. But what happened? You got here and then you set up shop, and 5 years ago looks probably a little different than it looks like it is today.
Very different. When I was driving, when I finally got across the California border line, the state line to Arizona, I knew how big this move was for me because everybody just thought I was crazy. Like, she's doing what? I had a place to stay for a month or two with a friend of a friend in Siesta Key, a really nice Christian family. But I mean, they were strangers to me, right? Like that whole thing. I had gotten out of I was a designer with Bassett Home Furnishings because I've been in design all my life in one capacity or another. And I literally sold all my beautiful furnishings that I had just made the year or two before. And the only thing I kept was what I could keep in my SUV. And my only rule was that I had to be able to see out of all the windows. And I knew from point to point where I was going. So I had a stop in Arizona with a friend for a few days. But when I got from that California to Arizona border, it hit me like I was driving off a cliff.
Mm.
Metaphorically speaking, like what was I doing? Now, like I said, I've traveled a lot. I've been in the Himalayas and trekked, and I'm pretty adventurous, but this wasn't going on a trip and coming home. This was leaving home for good, I think. And it was the most spiritual 11 days that I remember having because it was just me, all my podcasting that I listened to, all my social media people that I was listening to, and God. It felt like nobody cared that I left. They're like, okay, where's she going now? But this is what we are here for, in my opinion. And we are here as sovereign beings. Some people don't claim that. Some people believe it costs too much. I left and chose to leave everything because of it. Good, bad, or indifferent. And there's been all those things in the mix in the last 5 years. But I want to tell your audience this one story. And I know it was a God thing. Like I know it was a divine appointment. I was coming out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, which used to be a beloved city for me. I'd done so many things in my life in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the whole thing was shut down and it was very creepy. And I got out of the city and I was just driving. It's in the middle of nowhere, right? And I was going, my next stop was San Antonio, Texas. And all of a sudden I see this old pickup truck and the windows were down. And as I moved into the fast lane, it was a woman driving this pickup truck. And I used to have a truck and a little ranch in Idaho, and that was another side of my life, my book and my horse chapters. But I drove past this woman and her hair was flying in the wind and it was hot out. And I looked at her and she just looked like she was completely at peace. And we were in the middle of nowhere. And I looked at her as a figure, like she was mirroring what I was attempting to do. But she had figured out some level, and maybe this is just in my mind, she had found some level of inner peace no matter what she had or didn't have. That was a divine sign on my way to Florida. Definitely a divine sign. So it doesn't obviously look like what we think it's going to look like along the way.
And isn't it true that we try to control our own destiny in many cases, and we try to do it on our own? And I know that you alluded to your book. Would you like to talk about that for a little bit?
Sure. How does wonder and beauty get to be part of this beauty artist's life? Well, I'm a mother of a 28-year-old son now. He's my only child. I had one of those lives, and I lived in Marin, California, which is beautiful. I love the San Francisco Bay Area, and I left Los Angeles and Hollywood for the Bay Area. I was in my mid 30s at this point. I had enough of Hollywood, and I continued to want to do my craft and do that. But it's a very different market up in the Bay Area, or it was then, and it still is, I'm sure. And I got married. I had my son in my late 30s, and the marriage did not last more than 5 years. And several years after the divorce, my ex-spouse took my son. My son was the age of 10. At that point in time, we had fought 200 court cases. I had 10 attorneys in every court in the land, and on that went. So Wonder and Beauty is a project. I call it God's project. It's my story. It's our story, but it's God's project. And as many times as I've tried to leave this project and be like, I can't figure this out, I've got to go make some money, I have to focus on some other things, it recently just came back on my radar in a very big way. So Wonder and Beauty finally has, everybody had been asking for a soft cover, and I had changed my publishers. So I was with another publisher, and then I took all my publishing. I always had the rights, but I took it under my own name, and I hadn't figured out how to get the soft cover on. I'm not a graphic artist at all, and it's complicated. And recently I had called my pastor here in Sarasota, and I remembered thinking, he's an author, like he must know somebody, and he did. And that's another divine story. But we just finished republishing Wonder and Beauty with the soft cover, and the author banner is written by a New York Times bestselling author, which is Mike Dooley. I've traveled a lot and done a lot of work with his group and traveled throughout the world with his group. And that was a real bonus for Wonder and Beauty because it's such a tough story to even fathom as a mother or anybody that loves their children or somebody else's children. And I always think of it this way, because when I started this book, I knew that I needed to complete this book, and I'd never written anything other than letters to my grandfather or articles in school and that sort of thing. But this was something that I had to do, or I knew I couldn't go on. So Wonder and Beauty is that level of soul work that I needed to do to complete this for my son. Because at the time I started writing Wonder and Beauty, I didn't know where my son was, if he was dead or alive. He didn't know where I was, if I was dead or alive, but I was going to certainly leave something of legacy for him no matter what. And that's what this work became. But in the midst of it, God always talks about that he will bring beauty out of ashes. And truly, that's what this has become. That's why we started this interview. And I was saying, walking by faith and not by sight. Oof, some days it's impossible. It's just a tagline. Other days, like today in this interview, I'm actually seeing this as truth. Like I'm living, walking proof that actually is the truth. So, Wonder and Beauty is now out. And another sweet part of this project, my friend Julian Evans, that I met in San Francisco, she was this light, like bright light, like just bubbly and bright and inquisitive and intuitive and all kinds of things.
This episode is brought to you by Fearlessly Debt Free. Do you have great income, but the debt just doesn't seem to be going down fast enough? Just know that you are not alone. At Fearlessly Debt Free, I help people just like you pay everything off. Credit cards, loans, even mortgages, in half to a third of the time, for half to a third of what you owe. And no, this isn't budgeting, it's not debt consolidation or bankruptcy. It's math, it's strategy, and it's automatic. And it works. How would it feel to be completely debt-free and to start building incredible wealth much, much faster? Schedule your free Debt to Wealth discovery call today at fearlesslydebtfree.com and take your next steps fearlessly.
She passed on 2 years ago. She wrote me a letter when I was visiting and living in Mississippi for a little while. And she's the narrator on the Audible, which I think you said you listened to Audible. Yes. So that you heard Jolene's voice. And the way that even happened was she said to me in the midst of this lockdown before I left California, she said, I've always wanted to have a voiceover career. And I said, gosh, you could do that. You've got the most unique voice. And so we had meetings about that while I was in California before I left California. And I gave her the go ahead to bring in as much emotion as it felt natural for her to do. And that was her creation for my book, because she met me when my son was stolen. And I was working with her in those days. So this isn't just my labor of love. This is so many people's labor of love. So I know that as Wonder and Beauty continues on and goes where I believe it has a very good opportunity to go, it will really honor her legacy as well, because she is the voice of the book.
I did listen to the Audible, and I do a lot of auto university when I'm driving my car, and I feel like that's a really good use of my time. But you're right, she put so much emotion into that, where she was crying sometimes with some of the ways that she was narrating. And I knew that you weren't reading it. So that makes all the sense in the world of how she could feel so authentic when she was reading that book. And I'm looking over at my notes because you don't really want to take notes while you're driving, but I did write this down, and it says, this was your quote, let there be purpose in your pain. And then the book was Finding Purpose in Your Pain. So you had really elaborated on that a bit. And we all have a story. And I know even in our life, we had an awful loss where we don't have the ability to see our baby again until we get to heaven to see him. It's my little grandbaby. But it was very healing to read your book. And I know that you could have gone down such an ugly path, but the way that you wrote the book gave so much power to how you could stay in touch with your son and how you could stay connected with your son. And even though it was felt that you went through such a trying time, you never really went down that ugly road in your book. You only kept it focused on what can I do with what I'm able to do, and not what do I not have control over. And chapter after chapter, I'm like, again, sitting at the edge of my seat, like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And for me to hear you talk in this interview and talk about the relationship that you have now with your son, it's amazing. It's beautiful. And it may not have turned out that way if you chose to go in a different direction. So, why don't you elaborate a little bit on what it took for you to stay in that vision? Because you had the vision so crystal clear, even when it wasn't happening.
Oof, you make it, you've put a pretty face on the darkest times in my life. As you can imagine, you're a mother. I guess once again, I refer back to God. I'm not a reluctant follower. I'm not, but I'm just me. There is a specific story in my book, and I forget the chapter, but there was no question when I was in the midst of something divine. Because I'm always looking for that, because it's very magical. It's very confronting. It's very convicting. It's not condemning, it's convicting. I can feel it. It's tangible for me. But there was that evening that I was in this big group therapy session, and there were people in there from the inner circle. It was AA and NA and people that had just lost their minds, and had this big group of people that were just hurting. And it was a meeting one night. And I never went to those meetings because I was really looking for answers anywhere I could try and get them. And there wasn't any stone that I did not overturn. And that is truly my personality and my determination, because this was such a level of injustice that nothing in the legal realms could help me anymore. And I literally just ran out of money, as you can imagine. So I'm in this meeting. It's an unusual night for me to be in this meeting. I'm in the inner circle, and then there's circles and circles of people behind me. I hear this young man start talking, and I could tell he was behind me, right or left, but he was behind me. I could tell by his voice what age he might be. And there was something that he said. He goes, "And I'm here and I'm having a really tough time because my mother committed suicide." And he hit me right here. And I turned around, not to cause more attention that he was already having on him, but I turned around. And when I looked at this young man, he must have been in like his early 30s. He looked like Darian might look down the line. It was a thunderbolt of a download for me. And so I turned back around to face the front so I could hear the rest of what he was saying. And I clearly heard from the divine that these are not the choices you want to make, because that's the legacy you leave. And I didn't feel like, oh my gosh, how could this woman do this? Because I was on the edge of that myself. But that evening, I made that decision. And the decision I made is, no matter what I have to do, I'm going to keep putting one foot in front of the other. I will not leave my son with that legacy. And because of this mother, I will honor her by living my life. Now, I don't know where this all comes from other than God Almighty to have that level of conviction, but I know that's where it comes from. Because I was in a really dark place those years. And then I got moving, and then I made another big, bold move, and that was back up to Northern California to start all over again and go, was I under this crazy illusion that my life was really good at one point in time? What happened? And I went, fine, I'll go. So I think it's been so many years now because I can get through a conversation like this without breaking down, because certainly then I wouldn't have been able to do this. But today, it's not that it doesn't affect me, because of course it affects me. I've lived every step of it, just like everybody is living every step of their life. But I think in order to honor God, I have to move forward and do this. And I didn't really want to. And it all started with a $4.14 royalty that I got on March the 4th. And I'm like, what's with these royalties? Like $4.14, like who cares, right? But I'm thinking, all right, I'll pick it up again. I'll see if I can get the soft cover on. And at least Olive created the triad of the Kindle, the Audible, and the soft cover. So here we are.
It's a beautiful book. It really is a beautiful book.
Thank you.
And
Thank
I
you.
feel like, again, when I was reading it, there were so many tangible things that people in crisis could do. It was more than your story. It was your story and what you did through that journey. And I know, don't want to give too much of it away because I want to encourage people to get it, but you did things and you started writing. You started writing, correct me if I'm wrong, before your book became a book, right? You started writing those blogs.
I started, yes, it was 2012. And in fact, people have suggested that I take the blogs that I wrote to my son, my girlfriend in Texas, and she's still here, she's still around. Because technology has never been something that I've been super excited about. It's a tool. And in 2012, I had hit that 5 year mark where I hadn't seen Darian at all. I didn't know where he was. I was just trying to survive. I knew he didn't know where I was. And my girlfriend said, why don't we put together a WordPress blog and you write what you're doing today? And I was like, what? I'm like, no. That's where it began. And one night I had a dream and I was having some very, very vivid dreams. I do believe there's no question that our consciousness is energy, that we're energy, that we translate ideas and things like that because we are energy. And one night I had a very vivid dream and I heard my son's voice in my spirit and he said, never give up, mom, never give up. It was like he was commanding me. It was like a statement. It wasn't never give up, mom. It was like never give up, mom. And I went, never give up, mom. I want to give up. And that became the title to the blog, Never Give Up, Mom. I wrote once a month, typically. That's all I could pull myself together to do. But I wrote once a month on a WordPress blog, and the mandate from the divine was write about your love for your son. And when God said write about your love for your son, I'm like, for how long? And God said forever, as long as I tell you to. So I had very clear margins in which I needed to write. I had very clear margins in what I needed to put out there because whatever we put out there on the internet stays forever. I had very clear mandates as far as what the next month might be. And I was by myself a lot. I was back in the cosmetic business. I was up in the San Francisco Bay Area. My life was busy, but it was very empty, as you can imagine. And I started learning how to write. Fast forward when he became 18, I didn't know you could do this then, but if you Googled your name, now we've got all these different browsers, but if you Googled your name, as you did some research, as you said on me, there's all these pictures of you, things that you've done, and you're like, oh my gosh. So I would suspect he did, or one of his buddies Googled his name and never gave up mom came up. And I wrote for 5 years on the internet, not knowing where he was. And I think probably more importantly, of course, I wanted him to be okay, all of those things. But I didn't know if he was alive, if he hated me. How does your mom, that's been your mom, like all of a sudden disappear out of your life without coming back? So never gave up mom was a mandate from above. I'm quite sure of it. And those years were the dark years, prepared me to stay in a particular alignment with what I was supposed to do with this, because I could have gone a lot of different ways with this. But I have a feeling that we wouldn't be sitting here talking if that's the case. It's been a journey for sure, but that's what I did for 5 years, and I'm quite sure that my son found it.
Did you ever find out from him when he started to see your work? Because I know that, again, he did reach out. So was it prior to that he had seen it?
Oh, this was one night. I had written Never Give Up, Mom, and I was wrong about a year or a date, like when he must have graduated or something. Or like he was a sophomore in university or a freshman. I don't know. I did a wrong date. And in the middle of the night, I got, no, not freshman, Junior. And I'm like, what? He was watching it. It was the only way we could stay in touch. And through the years, in those years, I found many other stories from other mothers, specifically, not to say that fathers certainly didn't have these same stories and these same experiences, but they didn't know where their children were, and their children didn't know where they were. And it's unfathomable. I mean, it's like you're thinking, why? What happened? Like, I don't go into things in my book that I knew by what my attorneys told me that would not be acceptable. And as we both know, the divine always leads you down the right path to create the divine story in the end, which is really parallel and aligned with biblical principles. I couldn't figure that out. Are you kidding me? I was a shattered mother. He was watching.
And 2020 vision, right? After the fact, to see where you are today. Well, as we think about moving forward, and with you now having this rebirth of your book, it sounds like you tabled it for a little bit. What are some of the things that you'd like to do? Because clearly you've impacted with the people that have reached out to you over the years. Do you see that there's a clear path forward with taking this to a next level to help people on a different plane where they could use this as a way of healing or a way of taking their hurts and their dark times to bring some light and some hope and some opportunities to say, okay, we're going to move forward and we're going to keep moving and it'll be okay.
Lisa, that's a really good question. And I've touched base with the equine community here, which, as you can tell, the horses are very important to me, and they still are. They always will be. So I have friends that have a couple ranches up in Ocala. I have a feeling this will start to unfold naturally as well. I will have the time to look at the different options, or really what the doors that are going to open in this way. Because for me, horses and humans, equine therapy was the most profound part of my healing. And when I still look at the horses and I look at Buck Brenneman, because I got to meet Buck Brenneman quite recently. I met Buck up in Ocala in January, and it was a huge thrill for me because I talk about him. I speak about what he does in my book and how his story impacted my life. So I'm open to the different opportunities that'll come along. I'm fortunate enough to have a flexible schedule in what I do in my beauty business and my sales business, that I would definitely carve that time out to do something as abundant as we're talking about, is enrich as work like this. I've thought about different things like becoming an equine therapy assistant, but none of those things have panned out as I've just needed to continue to do my life. So I have a feeling as speaking opportunities become open again, that it will lead to something. It wouldn't surprise me if it did. And so we'll just see, but I'm certainly available to speak in group settings or even one-on-ones. I have that on my website in Beauty by Charla. I'm not a life coach per se, but if somebody wanted to reach out and get in touch with me, that would definitely happen.
Seeing your program and just reading through that book, it gave so much hope, and there's so many people hurting. And I'm here to say, go Charla, go, because I feel like that's going to be such a really big opportunity for so many people. And again, you've heard it from the people who are commenting and reaching out to you, and I'm sure you did your blog too. And which helps people understand they're not alone. And even in my industry, people are not alone when it comes to finances and they feel like they're buried under a rock. You're not alone, and it's an opportunity to open up the conversation. Let's make it a normal conversation. So,
Right.
are there any things that you can share before we close here? Maybe somebody's listening to this right now and they've got their challenges and they want to maybe grow or align with some of the things that you're saying. Is there anything that you can say or give them some direction, and what would be the first step?
It sounds ridiculously simple. The first step is literally to take the step, to physically take the step. one of the many things that I've learned as being really important tools, especially when you're going through trauma and when you have gone through trauma or you're in crisis, which is all the same. Trauma typically is something that is over a course of period of times, which could be something that's happened throughout your life from the time you were a child. It's as simple as literally going outside with your bare feet, because I've done it in the snow and I've done it in the heat here, and going barefoot and grounding. There's something about the earth and its electromagnetic components, okay? And what that means is it calms your nervous system. There is no straight line to healing, especially through this level of trauma and grief. There's not. But one of the thorns, and it truly is the greatest thorn, in my opinion, that is going to have to be dealt with, because I think it's a ghost, it's a boogeyman. When I started doing my shame work, my work around shame, can you imagine a mother losing her child, even though I never lost my child in the sense that he was taken from me legally, but I couldn't fight in the legal battles anymore. I ran out of money. That has got to be the most shameful thing for a mother, because everybody's like, what did you do? What did she do? What happened? And the court systems are ugly. And the court systems, especially family court, it's ugly as ugly as could be. So physically, when you take yourself out of a particular situation because you're ruminating in your head, which could, I swear, kill you after a period of time, go outside, go touch the trees, go bury your feet in the grass, go cry, go scream, go do, I mean, at a park, your backyard, something. Physically take your body out of the situation if you can possibly do that, and go outside. That is so, it's free. If you can get around horses, dogs, cats, animals, they're a secondary tool, and they'll know exactly what's going on with you. They may run away, but an animal will always understand what's happening with you because they read your energy. And they're there to heal you if they're your animal or an animal that you love. But animals are incredible, incredibly useful, and incredibly healing beings. So going outside, changing your state, as Tony Robbins would say, I've done a lot of Tony Robbins work. Change your state. Yeah. I've walked on those hot coals. I've jumped off I jumped off the 60-foot pole like in Fiji. I've done some pretty interesting things. Ice. Here's another crazy thing. Ice. Get ice. It changes, especially if you're hot. It changes your state very, very quickly. Do something completely opposite of the state that you're in, physically, tangibly. It jars the brain, and not in a weird way, but it's just like, wait a minute. It jars you out of that loop of thought. That sounds crazy, but it's just the basic things, but it changes your state. And once you change your state, you can start to change the loop in your mind. That's 101. But shame is the thorn that's buried within your psyche that you will have to address with a professional that understands this kind of work at some point in time. But I want to just say something to everybody that has shame, because at some level we all do. I did this core group in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The place is no longer there. It was a decision that saved my life. And I did a lot of core work around shame in this core group. And I found out after 30 days of doing this work, not exclusively, but engaging that and other things, that the story I made up in my head wasn't my story. It was this person's story and it was that person's story. And I took all that shame and made it one big rock and was carrying that around. And I suspect that that's part of why I continued to feel the way I did until I did some ceremonial things about bearing other people's stories and really just looking at mine. Because there is nothing worse. And I'm not leaving a father out of this example at all, but there is nothing worse than somebody saying, "You're a horrible mother." When all I ever wanted to do at the late age in my 30s is be a great mom. I was very lucky to have him. I had miscarriages before that. And so I was very lucky to have him. So to get to that point in my life, and then that happened, that was the excruciatingly dark night of the soul for me, that scenario. But God does create beauty from ashes. And this is a story of exactly that, I believe.
Absolutely. And you're right, to just snap yourself out of it. That's where the expression comes from. Snap yourself out of it. Or if you're frantic or hysterical and somebody slaps you in the face, it's to change your state, change your energy. And I'm a true believer in even crying grandbabies, taking them outside and they immediately stop crying. Or
Exactly.
like you said, go hug a tree. It sounds insane, but there's so much energy that we are never, ever, ever connected to. Never. With our flooring in our shoes, in our cars, and our wheels, we barely ever touch the ground anymore. And
Yep.
it does make a difference. And seeing you go through that angst and that story and taking the time for yourself. I know that you alluded to many of the different things that you've done, and I've done myself, where we take the time because we're worth it. We are really worth it to do that deep discovery, to find out how we can be the best that we can be. Even when other people are telling us their story, it's not our story. It is not our story at all. But so amazing. What do they say? The wisdom is wasted on the old. So if we had this wisdom when we were much younger. I just want to take this time to thank you so much, Charlotte. I know we did this off the cuff, and you're not only beautiful on the outside, but clearly your heart and your mind and everything that makes you who you are is absolutely stunning. And I can't wait to see where this conversation goes and how we can stay connected throughout the next however many days, because season or reason or a lifetime. But I hear
Yes,
that
thank
we
you.
connect in so many different ways hearing your story, and want to encourage everybody to listen to your book and see what they can glean from it. But again, thank you for the gift of your time and being able to share your story and shed your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for joining us on Big Bold Moves Abundant Life. Conversations like this remind us that even through heartbreak, uncertainty, and seasons we would never have chosen, there is still purpose, growth, healing, and hope waiting on the other side. I hope today encouraged you to keep taking those next small steps forward, to trust that your story still matters, and to remember that you're never alone in what you're walking through. If this conversation spoke with you, please share it with someone who may need a little encouragement today. And as always, keep making those big, bold moves toward the abundant life you were created to live.